So hi everyone, just as Sanket said, I'll be talking about Flutter. And before I start off, may I please have a show of hands how many people have already used Flutter? Okay, great. And how many of you are pro React Native developers? Yeah, okay, this would be fun. All right. So my name is Rohan Taneja. I'm an Android developer for a few days on GeekyAnts, and I'm an organizer at GDG New Delhi. So I'm a native Android developer, or as we call it, OEM Android developer, since Flutter is native as well, so don't confuse those terms. I'm an OEM Android developer who recently fell in love with Flutter. So I'm here to share my excitement with you and to try and convince you to try Flutter just once. Try it for a day and then let's see what happens. I'm not here to tell you that Flutter is the best SDK, that would be ridiculous. Let's see. So those of you who are pro React Native developers are probably shaking their head that they're never going to leave React Native, no matter which SDK comes to the market. So hold on for 30 minutes, I may change that thought. So my title, the title I chose is that why Flutter is the framework developers deserve and also the one that they need right now. A Batman-ish title just for the fun. So I'll be focusing on the second part first, but also the one that they need right now. So what's so special about right now? Recently, Google announced that Android is running on 1 billion active devices. Shortly after that, Apple came out with the announcement that iOS is running on 1 billion active devices. So if you're only building for Android, you're losing out on a potential revenue of 33.3%. If you're only building for iOS, you're losing out on 66.6%, basic math. Other than that, cross-platform framework, using those frameworks allows you to develop your apps in using half the effort and half the time. So let's say you're sold on the idea of cross-platform framework. Since most of your React Native devs over here, you already are sold on that. But what about Flutter? So let's just leave aside Flutter for a little while. Let's focus on cross-platform frameworks. The first one that caught the most attention was probably the Ionic framework used by Amazon, and that's why you see the 404 error page a lot. So the Ionic framework uses a web view. Everything that you see on a screen is typically a web view, and everything is displayed inside that. Another problem with the Ionic framework is that it uses a bridge to access your native sensors or your OEM sensors like location, audio, and camera. Then this thing came to the market and it dominated the whole mobile app industry. So React Native solved the problem by getting rid of the web view and replacing that with a JavaScript bridge that allow you to access your OEM widgets from Android and iOS. So you have a JavaScript bridge that accesses your native Android and native iOS, and that is displayed on your app. It also allows you to access your location sensors, audio sensors, and all that stuff using the JavaScript bridge itself. But since we are talking about OEM widgets, let's just consider OEM Android and iOS as well. Pretty simple structure. You have your native code, they access OEM widgets, it gets displayed on your screen using the canvas, and you have direct access to location, audio, and camera. But before we head into Flutter, let's just take a moment back and think that how does an app really come into life? So if you're an agency like GeekyAnts, there's a client who comes to you, he tells you their idea. Then the client sits with the pre-sales team, the business analyst, and the designer, and the client tells the designer what he's thinking about. The designer takes a couple of weeks, comes out with brilliant UI and UX, and creates a mock-up. Then the designer, which is on the left of your screen, to the developer who's on the right of your screen. Sorry for the cliche image, but that's all I could find. So the designer tells the developer that this is what I have designed. Would you be able to do this? And what do we say to our designers? We say no. Because the ideas, brilliant ideas that they have are really difficult to implement. In your head, they look amazing, but when you try to implement them, they look really tough. So after you say no to your designer, you do either of two things. You either doze off, or you start celebrating, feeling that you've done a tremendous job by refusing to do the job to your designer, and now you can finally relax. But there are some people in every company who can never see happy developers. That's where this guy with his ever diplomatic face and approach steps in. He says, so the product manager says that the management has approved these designs and you, the developer, would have to work on them. So he asks you a simple question, when can this be done? And we as developers, what do we say to a product manager? Not today. So then you sit down with the product manager, you give him a realistic timeline, which gets immediately cut into half, and then you have to anyway implement those designs. But that makes you wonder. So the problem with saying no to designers is that there are some problems that developers have been solving for far too long. Some trivial problems. If you're an Android developer like me, having custom fonts in your text view is a huge problem if you're a beginner. Trying to implement basic animations is a problem itself. Then when you finally get to know about activities, you learn about fragments and a thing called the backstack. So that's an issue as well. Even if you get over all these problems, there are some problems that go back to API 14, API 16 and device specific problems that are really a big concern. I'm sure you must have heard about the Samsung Galaxy S4 camera issue. It's never working. So the problem is that even if you put in your hours, you put in your weeks, you get down into these problems and you solve them. The worst part is that they do not provide any business value. You're solving these problems only because they are a problem with your platform. They do not put money into your client's pocket. So they add no business value. So that really makes you wonder, does a mobile developer's life need to be that tough? Does it need to be that hard? Shouldn't developers instead be focusing on writing better maintainable code, scalable architecture, or trying to implement features that actually add some business value? That's where Flutter steps in. So I'll be talking about Flutter now and how it's helping you solve all those problems. So what's so special about Flutter? So Flutter is Google's mobile SDK for building beautiful native apps in record time. Two key focus areas over here. Number one, building beautiful native apps. Number two, in record time. So let's start with the second part again, in record time. So how is Flutter able to build apps in record time? Point number one, Flutter uses Dart. So all those of you just like me who thought that Flutter was dead, it's not. It's one of the most used languages internally at Google. And now that Flutter is out, it's one of the most popular languages in the external developer world as well. So the thing that's special about Dart is that it can be both used as a compile time language and an interpreted language. A compile language is your Java or Kotlin that's first compiled and then shipped. Your interpreted languages is JavaScript or Python that's shipped and then compiled on the fly. So Dart can be used both. So before we step into the details of Dart, let's just talk about an experiment that the Dart team at Google conducted. So the Dart team wanted to get some feedback on Dart and Flutter. So they went to another development team in Google itself. They told them what Flutter is, but they did not tell them what language they'll be using to build Flutter apps. They told them what Flutter is, they asked them to build a few features, and the next day when the Dart team went back to the other team was building features on the fly. Then the Dart team asked the other team that, do you know what language you're using? We haven't provided any documentation to you at all. The other team said that this language was so easy to pick up that they didn't need any documentation at all. If you are from a Java or a JavaScript background, picking up Dart is the easiest thing. If you want to learn Flutter directly, don't go into learning Dart. So next, Dart allows you to have an amazing feature that's called the stateful hot reload, similar to what you have in React Native. So for Android developers, think of stateful hot reload as instant run, except for two things. Stateful hot reload actually works, and stateful hot reload is amazingly fast. It would be a crime to compare its speed with the speed of instant run in Android. So I say stateful hot reload. By stateful, I mean that if you are 10 screens down into your app and you make a change over there, you won't have to go to the first screen, come back to the 10th screen and see if the change was reflected. It's reflected within seconds. And that's done because Flutter separates the UI from the state, just like in React Native. So why Dart special in this case? Because this can be achieved only because Dart offers just-in-time compilation. That's why you have stateful hot reload. So it's so quick that something like a chat application, which most native developers dread, can be built in a matter of 5 to 6 hours. So this was the first project that I built as a Flutter developer, and I did this by referring to a Google Code Lab itself. So if you're not stupid like me, you don't make mistakes even when you're referring to tutorials, you can easily do this in 3 to 4 hours. So note that this app is using Firebase real-time database. So Flutter has amazing support for Firebase as well. And also note that the toolbar is different on Android and the toolbar is different for iOS. So you can easily make changes that are platform specific, even if you're using a cross-platform framework like Flutter. Moving on, everything is a widget in Flutter and the whole widget tree is drawn on the screen at runtime. So what does this mean? What does drawn on the screen at runtime really mean? So this is what Flutter structure look like. You see an engine at the bottom that's entirely coded in C++, and you see a framework that's entirely in Dart. A couple of key things over here. The engine contains a Skia graphics engine that's responsible for allowing you to have all those renderers in your app. Then the render on the top displays your widget on the canvas itself. So this means that Flutter is not using your OEM widgets. It's not using your text view from Android. It's not using the corresponding thing from iOS. It's drawing everything on the screen at runtime thanks to that Skia engine and the renderer. Another that if it's not using OEM widgets, then how is a Flutter app native? A Flutter app's native because of the amazing language that it's using, that's Dart. Dart allows just-in-time compilation, but it also allows ahead-of-time compilation. That allows you to compile your code directly into native ARM code. And that's how you get your high-quality native apps that promise to deliver 60 FPS animations as well. Something that React Native is still struggling with a little. So now you wonder, I have a recycler view in Android that offers me amazing recycling properties. My view is smooth enough, but how do I get that in Flutter if that's not using my native views? So Flutter has recycling embedded in the system itself. You have a list view in Android that does not have recycling. You have a list view in Flutter. You have a recycling view in Android that has that recycling part. You have a list view builder in Flutter that has that recycling part. So every view that you have in Android or iOS, there's a corresponding widget for that by default. So this is what Flutter structure looks like. You have a native code thanks to the direct compilation to ARM code. Then there are widgets that are directly rendered onto your canvas. Note that there's no web view over here, there's no JavaScript bridge. Even for accessing platform-specific channels like location and audio, you have no bridge at all. So yeah, so when compared to Ionic, Flutter does not have a web view. When compared to React Native, there's no JS-like. When compared to Java, Dart does not use a virtual machine. And when compared to other frameworks, Flutter does not use OEM widgets at all. So there's a star in front of no virtual machine. That's because when you run your Flutter app in debug mode, there's a banner on the right top that says debug. That's when Dart is really using a virtual machine. If you take out a release version of your app, the virtual machine is no longer used. The virtual machine is only required so that you can have stateful hot reload. So if you have a release app, that would be much smoother than your debug version. So let's consider a scenario where you have a client and you're working in an agency and he wants you to build a chat app that looks like WhatsApp. So this is what you give to him. Pretty amazing, you did the job, that's fine. But the client is from, let's say, US, Australia. All he sees the whole day is people carrying iOS devices. He knows what iOS UI looks like, but he has no clue about Android. So he asks you to build something like this. You want the iOS UI replicated on your Android device. Now doing something like this is really tough with React Native and is amazingly tough with Android and iOS. But Flutter can get this done easily because it is not using your native views. Anything you draw on the screen, you can draw it on iPhone or an Android device. So that's why you can easily achieve this. Similarly, you can also have material design running on iOS device itself. Not the best thing to do, but this allows you to do an amazing thing. So if you have a Jelly Bean device that came out in 2012, material design came out in 2014. If you want to run material design on a Jelly Bean device, you can do that with Flutter, not with any other platform or framework. Because Flutter is drawing everything on the screen, you give it Jelly Bean, Lollipop, Marshmallow, it will draw the same thing on the screen. So these are some award-winning apps. These apps won the Webby Awards for the best UI and the UX. If you look closely, there's the Android version on the left, the iOS version on the right. These two versions look extremely similar, probably 90 to 95%. There are some key changes in both of them, and they are really crucial. So these are not Flutter apps. These were built using OEM Android iOS. But if you want to build something like this with Flutter, it would be extremely easy. You'll just exactly code once, and you'll have the same thing replicated on both of them. There are some other apps as well. You can see that the brand integration is taken into account as well. There's no issue that whenever you're using material design, all your apps start looking like Google apps. So there's none of those issues with Flutter. So let's move on to another story. There's this huge MNC that builds Android phones. And one day they feel that they are not doing so well with sales. So they call a meeting for their top management. And everyone in that meeting is proposing ideas. The first person says that let's have slimmer phones. The second person says let's offer better battery. Third person says that why don't we just have a dual front camera? Then this genius steps in, probably the design head. He says, why don't we just override all system fonts? And this is what your app starts to look like. I'm pretty sure you must have figured out which company manufacturer I'm talking about. But if you are using this phone, if you have been using this phone, you know how ugly it looked at times, especially in apps like WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, most highly used apps. So no matter what you do, no matter if you choose React Native or Android, you cannot override this. But you can override this in Flutter because override all system fonts you want, will not be using them. Flutter is painting directly everything on the screen. So Flutter also allows you to leverage your existing knowledge. if you're a pro Android developer who knows all the shortcuts for Android Studio, or you're an iOS developer who loves Xcode, or if you're a React Native developer who's been doing everything with VS Code, you can build a Flutter app using these IDEs itself. You just need the Flutter plugin. So you don't need to get access to another IDE. There's no special IDE for Flutter. You can use any of these and you can get your app running in minutes. Flutter also has amazing support for Firebase, just as I discussed earlier. It offers amazing support for material design. And the key thing over here is that you can still access Android APIs, iOS APIs, and SDKs for both of them as well. So Flutter has support for those as well. So Google conducted another experiment. They were using an Android app internally and they wanted to build the iOS client for that app. So that was their requirement. Instead of building the iOS client using Swift and Xcode, they decided to build a Flutter app and they shipped it to both platforms. The best thing was that the existing Android users could not tell the difference between the Flutter app and the previous OEM Android app. Plus, you got your iOS app for free. So that's how great Flutter's performance is. You can really not tell the difference. Another interesting story related to this is that some developers asked the Google team that, can you tell me which apps on the Play Store are made using Flutter and which are OEM Android apps? The Flutter team raises their hands. They cannot do so because you simply cannot differentiate between both these apps because they look exactly the same. So let's get down to the real deal. So this is a simple UI. You have a navigation drawer on the left top that's represented by this hamburger icon. You have a toolbar that says Flutter. You have a menu action on the right that's an edit icon. And you have a floating action button. So any Android developers over here? Okay, could you please give me a guess how much time would this take on Android, building this on Android? Just the UI. 2 hours. Any other guesses? Sorry? 2-3 hours. Okay, so I asked a lot of Android developers. Some of them were really senior. I averaged out the time and I put it down as 30 minutes. Let's be fair to the Android developers. So React Native developers, how much time would this take on React Native? Any guesses? Let's say we are not using cool things like native base. If you're not using native base. If you're not using WilderX. You cannot use anything that's developed internally at GeekyAnts. Let's go for 15, 20, 10. Okay, I averaged it out again and it came out to be 20. So let's say 15 so that all of you don't beat me up. So can you tell me or give a guess how much time would this take on Flutter? 10. Okay, so if we get this done in 10, would you be convinced to give Flutter a try? Okay, if we get this done in 7.5. Okay, let's get this done in 5 and let's see what the results are. So I came all prepared. I have a stopwatch that I'll be running really soon. So this is going to be a live coding thing and let's see how that goes. So before I start the time, I'll just walk you through what's there on the screen right now. I'm using IntelliJ. So for all Android developers who love Android Studio, try using IntelliJ for Flutter because it's lightweight and it gives you the same shot. So this is just a main.dart file that has a main method. Programming language, the main method is the starting point of your Dart program. I'm running an Android emulator over here. There's nothing on the screen right now. So I'll just go ahead and start the time. So just like main method is the starting point of your Dart program, I'll also be walking through every line of code that I do. The run app method is the starting point of your Flutter app and it requires a widget. So I cannot access the run app method right now because I need to import a package for that. That's called material. I have a stateless widget over here. I give it the same name that's in my main method. Yeah, so I'm a stateless widget. So there's a container. Think of it as a parent layout. Let's just add a color to it so that we know that it really works. Right now, I'll use this green button that's called hot restart. The yellow one over here is hot reload. I'm using hot restart for the first time because any changes that you make to the main method require you to give it a hot restart. After that, you can use hot reload. So I just said 10 words and hot restart worked well. So I have a container that shows the blue color. I'll just replace this with the material app. The material app allows you to access components from material design, such as the app bar and all that. It lets you beautify your app. Let's remove the color. That requires a home widget. And let's just pass a scaffold over here. So the scaffold would really allow you to access the floating action button and the navigation door and all that stuff. So that requires a body. So let's just pass a container over here. Let's not make big changes. Let's give it a color. So I press hot reload in 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. So it gets reflected in the app in 1.8 seconds. This would get better. So I have a scaffold over here, and let's see if I can add an app bar or a toolbar. I try to give it a title. Let's just call it, and let's press hot reload. So you get a toolbar over here in seconds. Now I want to add a menu item on the right. So I have an icon button widget for that. That wants me to give it two things, an icon and an onPressed function. I'll just go with an icon right now. And let's just say icons.edit. I press hot reload. You can see the gray icon on the right top. It doesn't look so good. Let's just change its color. And I press hot reload again. It changes to white. Let's see if we can have a floating action button now. So I have a floating action button again. I'll just add a comma so that it formats well. That needs an icon. So let's use a favorite star icon for now. I press hot reload. Oh, there's an error. Floating action button dot extended should be there. So it's good that this came up, because you have a crash in your app. The error is displayed on the screen, but you press hot reload, the error moves away, you get your floating action button back again. So this is how easy it is. Now let's just remove the color. The red looks ugly. Let's just remove this, press hot reload. Let's see how much time we have left. We are just over 3 minutes. Now comes the biggest challenge. You need to add a drawer in your app. The drawer is the toughest part in Android. I'm not sure how tough it is on using React Native. So let's see how tough that is using Flutter. So I just add a drawer, I press hot reload, and I have a drawer over here. And all this was done in 3 minutes and 37 seconds. Thank you. So that's how easy it is to pick up Flutter and build UIs that were a mess in Android or iOS. Plus, you get this on Android, you get the same thing on iOS as well. If I had an iOS emulator running over here, I would have got the same UI over there as well. So you get one app for free. So moving on, we did this in just over 3.5 minutes compared to 15 minutes with React Native or 10 minutes with React Native, whatever sales you bought. So even if the live coding part didn't work, I had backup. So this is a screenshot of the code that we just did. It takes 44 lines. The one that we did is 35 lines. If you format a code well, that would take 44 lines. So it's that easy to build this in Flutter. Have you ever seen a snippet of code that would fit in your emulator itself? You would never see this with Android. So that's how easy Flutter is. And Google had some tests run internally, and they figured out that building an app with Flutter is 1.8 times faster than building it with native Android. Just comparing it to native Android, we're not even talking about iOS right now. And again, you are using 50% lesser code if you are using Flutter and not OEM Android. Plus, you get your iOS app for free. So these are some of the benefits for Flutter. Let's come to the real deal. Let's compare Flutter and React Native. So Flutter is a mobile SDK from Google. React Native is a mobile SDK from, sorry. I don't know how that came in here. They must be reading my slides and changed it, I guess. So React is a framework from Facebook. In Flutter, everything is a widget. In React Native, everything is a component. So let's see how is a widget different from a component. A Flutter widget structure is in Dart. The style is in Dart as well. The user interaction is handled by Dart. So everything is Dart. Pretty easy to use. A React Native component, on the other hand, the structure is in HTML, the style is in CSS, and the user interaction is in JavaScript. And this thing is called JSX. So for people like me who never really like JavaScript a lot, the full form of JSX would always mean JS extremely weird, just because I didn't understand it completely. So if you're using React Native as your primary mobile SDK, you may want to try out Flutter so that React Native becomes your ex-mobile SDK. So Flutter does not use OEM widgets. Everything is painted on the screen at runtime. React Native uses OEM widgets. Flutter offers 60 FPS jank-free animations. Animations on React Native do not have a wow factor. So if Flutter is so amazing, is Flutter the perfect mobile SDK to build your Android apps? Let's have a look at that as well. If you have an OEM iOS and Android app, the basic Hello World app that just has a text on the screen is a couple of MBs. The APK and IPA files is a few MBs, probably 1 to 2 on Android and a little more on iOS. If you have the same thing on Flutter, the basic app size is 6.7 MB. So let's see who the culprit is in this case. We talked, so there's another difference between Flutter and React Native, that Flutter ships a game engine with every app. React Native does not do so. Which engine is this that we're talking about? It's the same Skia engine that we talked about initially. That's responsible for approximately 4 MB of that 6.7 MB. This engine gets shipped with every APK or IPA file. This is the engine that we are talking about. But the good part is that the Flutter team says that they are not focusing, they are currently focusing on building a stable framework that offers a lot of features. They haven't even begun optimizing for size. So you can expect the size to be reduced later on after a couple of more preview releases and definitely before the stable release. So another thing that worries people about Flutter is feature completeness. Let's say there's a new feature in the market that's readily available on iOS and Android, but it's not available on Flutter because it's not using your native views. But the good part is that you can still hook your Flutter code with the platform code. How can you do that? If you see a Flutter project structure, there's a directory for Android and iOS as well. You can go into your Android code, access the main activity, activity main, all the files over there, and you can hook your platform specific code to your Flutter code itself. So every functionality that you have in your app right now can be done with Flutter by hooking it up with native components. So another thing is that I've already talked about this. If there's a new OS release, iOS 12 or Android P or something later than that, you get no new features on the OEM apps immediately. You can use those immediately, but you'll have to wait just a little while longer until someone or you itself creates a package for that. If you're really eager to try that out, you can hook it up with your platform code. And some people say that Flutter does not have a huge community. I don't agree with that. The Flutter community is growing rapidly. It's exploding in a way, and it could probably be the best ever because it provides you immediate support. So the Flutter community is big enough to have 32,983 stars on GitHub. This is from 1 PM this morning. I hope that by the end of this event, we reach 33,000 stars. So Flutter also has over 500 apps on the Google Play Store and many on the iOS App Store as well. This number is from a long time ago. This is not the latest number, but still there are a minimum of 500 apps on the Play Store. Let's do a small recap about Flutter. Flutter uses this amazing language called Dart that can be compiled or interpreted as well. Everything in Flutter is a widget drawn on the screen at runtime. Then Flutter offers stateful hot reload thanks to the just-in-time compilation offered by Dart. Flutter allows you to build high-quality native apps thanks to the ahead-of-time compilation offered by Dart. And you get the iOS app for free. All these features help you build your app in record time. When compared to iNic, Flutter does not use a web view. When compared to React Native, it does not use a JS bridge. It does not use a virtual machine in the release mode. And it does not have any access to your native OEM widgets. The best part is yet to come. The best part is that all of Flutter is open source. You can pick any bug, you can solve it, and it goes back into the Flutter code, and the community can use it. So Flutter's version right now is a release preview 1. There would be a couple of more release previews before the final 1.0 comes out. So if you're excited about Flutter and you want to start off with Flutter immediately, these are the resources that you can refer to. The best one are the Flutter docs. You head on to flutter.io, you see how you can build Flutter apps. There are 4 specific sections over there. One of them is Flutter for Android developers, Flutter for iOS developers, and Flutter for web developers. For an Android or iOS developer, you want to see what's the corresponding widget for a recycler view in Flutter, you can head on to that section. There's another section called Flutter for React Native developers. That's from the GeekyAnts team itself. So Google wanted to try that out because they knew that after hearing what Flutter is, a lot of React Native devs would be shifting from React Native to Flutter. That was explicitly meant to be there. I'm just kidding. Okay, then there's a resource that I started off my journey with. They are called the Google Code Labs. Really good, really detailed. You should definitely give this a try. If you're a blog reader or a person who likes to read a lot, you can subscribe to this Flutter weekly newsletter. You get an email in your inbox every week with the list of best blogs from the week itself. If you want to contribute to the community, write a blog of your own and submit it to the letter itself. Then there's this amazing YouTube channel called MTech Viral. The channel's owner is Pawan Kumar, who's the first Flutter GDE from India. He's right over here. If you could please raise your hand. So this channel has over 60 to 70 videos already on Flutter. So you should definitely try this out. If you're someone who doesn't want to compromise on the basics, you like learning from courses, Udacity being that famous, there's a course on Udacity, a free course from the Flutter team from Google itself. You can definitely try that out. Then if you're a podcast fan, there's a fragmented podcast from two Android developers who host a Google developer expert in their podcast, and they talk about Flutter for over 2 hours. Really interesting, do give that a shot. If you're looking for support and you don't find a lot on Stack Overflow, you can find that on Facebook in these two groups. Really good groups, you get support immediately. There are a lot of people already who have tried out Flutter over there. Then there's this GitHub chat. This chat has all the people from the Flutter Google team itself and the initial GDEs as well. So if you're looking for expert advice, you should definitely head down to this GitHub chat. If you're someone who loves learning in meetups or in groups, you should definitely contact your local GDG organizer so that you can ask them to organize a Flutter extended event or a Flutter Slams event. So I'll just wait for a couple of seconds so that you can. Okay. So even if you'd like to know more about the resources, I wrote a blog long time ago that has all these resources plus a couple of more. The URLs on the right top, so you can refer to that. There are two other blogs that I would highly recommend, both of them from Wim Lehler himself. He loves writing extensive blogs. The first one's called What's Revolutionary About Flutter. All of the queries that you have right now, most of them would be resolved using this blog itself. There's another one called Why Flutter Uses Dart, because a lot of people think Google introduces Kotlin, then they switch to Dart. What are they doing? So give this one a read and take out time because this is a 16-minute read. Previous one is a 15-minute read. So make sure you have ample time before you start moving on to this. So if you were sold on the idea of cross-platform framework already, I hope that now you're sold on the idea of Flutter itself. So using Flutter, you can finally say yes to your designer. So when you're using Flutter, your designer is happy, your developer is happy, your product manager, let's say some people are really hard to please. So I hope that all of you here at Flutter Bangalore are excited about Flutter and the community gets to see some really cool Flutter apps really soon. Thank you. Okay. So the major downside is the app size right now. The other thing is that when you want to use the components that are released with the latest iOS and Android updates, you'll have to wait a little while until someone comes up with a package for that. Probably these two are the major ones. No, it's just it's just with me. Yeah. Yeah, we have a question. Yeah. Yeah, so there's this layout inspector. Not sure I can't select it. So there's this layout inspector. Every view, every widget that you select over here, the same one gets highlighted in your screen in the emulator itself. You can use this. Yeah. Yeah, when you enable that using the developer options, the layout bounds method, you can see that. Okay, so that part you're using widgets that are drawn on the screen at runtime. So I'll put that over to Wim. Can we see the layout boundaries when? Okay. I think it's this. Okay. So I think you can do this using this tool, but not that layout inspector thing in the Android settings itself. Wim would be able to tell you better.
I think we can take it offline, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions on the generic side, on the architecture side, or anything else?
Sorry? Yeah, you can use Redux, you can use scope model, and there's a block pattern as well that you can use for state management. Yeah, BLOC. All right. Yeah. So he knows new ones as well. So you should talk to him after this talk. Sorry. Okay. So do we have support for libraries that?
How complete is the support of Google Maps?
Google Maps is not fully supported right now. It's supported, it's being used in the AppTree app, but it's not where the Flutter team would like it to be. Yeah.
So the native one is not supported, right? The native Google Maps? Right, okay. 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 Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so are we like rebuilding Google Maps in Flutter, or are we going to reuse the OEM widget which Google Maps comes with? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so your skier engine uses the GPU to draw everything on the screen.
Yeah, we have a question. Tanmay? Yeah.
Is there a GraphQL client for Flutter? A recommended one or a
That I'm not aware of. GraphQL client.
I've seen one. I've seen a GraphQL client.
open source one, but
Yes,
it's not
yeah.
as feature compatible as React, as Apollo?
Show a little bit of that during my time as well.
All right. One small correction. React Native doesn't use HTML and CSS. It uses JavaScript in its like core. So there's no other language than JavaScript. We have JSX, which also compiles down to JavaScript. So just to put the correct information there. And I don't want this to turn into a religion sort of thing. People need to be, I think I'll just go there. I mean, everyone should be open to new technologies, and that's why we gave Flutter a try. And we shouldn't paint another technologies as negative ones, which is very important, I guess. So I guess when we are going to talk about Flutter, and you also, yeah. Okay. No, I mean, this is just a sentiment in the community that these two technologies are fighting against each other, which is not, we are actually learning from each other. Flutter's core is actually based on React's architecture, which is like learning from each other, right? All right. All right, anyway, we have a little break now. We have some refreshments available and some sort of networking. We'll meet here after 10 minutes and then we can go ahead with Wim's talk. Okay, thank you so much.